Dr. Cornel West, who really needs no introduction, had cited a lot of these crowds not too long ago, particularly after the tragic death of George Floyd, as a promising sign in that so many whites were among those participating. The professor, best-selling author, with us right now. Doctor, that is an encouraging development. We're seeing even more of it today in cities across the country, recognizing a day that very few whites knew about a little more than a week ago. What do you think?
Well, it's always a beautiful thing to see human beings, no matter what color, bearing witness and being a force for good, for justice. But we have to recognize, my brother, that white brothers and sisters have always been a part of the Black freedom movement. You know John Brown, there's Lady Maria Child, there's Elijah Lovejoy, there's Theodore Parker, goes all the way up to Ann Braden and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, that non-Black brothers and sisters have chosen to be persons of integrity and generosity, concerned about justice for everybody, and it's always gone hand in hand. What is different now is that we have larger numbers, no doubt about that, larger numbers. But keep in mind, even the March on Washington, when Brother Martin Luther King Jr. told America about a dream that he had, you had a whole wave of white brothers and sisters standing there in Washington, D.C., alongside Blacks and Browns and Asians and indigenous people.
You know, Doctor, there's been a good deal of attention paid to making this day a national holiday. Republican Senator John Cornyn, among others, for that. HUD Secretary Ben Carson just saying that. Do you think that should happen? Make this a national holiday?
You know, I think it's a good idea, but I don't like the fetishizing of symbols. Symbols matter. I understand that, and I think it'd be a wonderful holiday, but we're really much more about substance. We're really much more about trying to ensure that we not only stay in contact with the rich humanity of Black people, but each and every one of us trying to make an effort to be forces of good for justice, whatever forms of injustice that we're focusing on. So that I'm a little leery of this notion of making this a holiday as if this becomes a major concession as opposed to fighting poverty, trying to eliminate the dilapidated housing and low quality education systems, but not enough resources, not enough jobs, and so forth. We have to keep in mind that when we're talking about race, we're always talking not only about hatred, but we're talking about greed. We're talking about economic systems that don't allow Black people and others to gain access to resources.
You know, there's been a move by some of these protesters to try to defund police departments and some to get rid of them altogether. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's going too far? What do you think?
Well, we have to keep in mind, my brother, that, you know, there's been a defunding of social programs, a defunding of the social net to sustain people, a defunding of the ability of regulating corporations, a defunding of money of ensuring that we have regulation, environmental protection. So defunding has to do with priorities. When people say defunding the police, what they're saying is we've got to talk about public safety. We've got to talk about people who are guardians in the community with community control and civilian oversight. It's not a matter of trashing. It's a matter of shifting our priorities. We've been living the last 40 years where the police, as well as the Pentagon, have access to nearly unlimited resources, but austerity for all the other parts of the budget. So we just need a shift in priorities, and that's exactly what Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. He said we need a revolution in our priorities, a revolution in our values, and then the kind of transfer of democratic sharing of power.
Well, I don't believe it. I don't believe that he ever talked about just disbanding police departments. But I do want to get what you think is going on, where a number of police departments across the country have said, wait a minute, we're not all awful. We're not all doing what happened to George Floyd. There's even talk of a sick out coming on July 4th. Of law enforcement security types who feel that they've now been just painted all as awful human beings. What do you think of that?
Well, I think we've got to resist any monolithic views of any institution or any peoples. Of course, there's always going to be decent peoples in whatever institution, whatever color, whatever group. But the problem is when you have a whole culture, let's say in a police department, where the police will not render each other accountable, knowing that there's chronic to systemic mistreatment, abuse of civilians. You see, that's a larger institutional problem. So it's not just a matter of bad apples and good apples in that regard. But and keep in mind, though, my brother, that anytime you're talking about fundamental transformation, you have to be very, very subtle and nuanced in the language that you use. So that anytime you're using slogans.
Let me ask you about that, though, Professor. If you,
Sure.
I apologize.
Sure.
I did want to get
your
sense of where all of this is going. An issue that's come up again and again is whether the president is helping or hurting the problem. I know you've been critical of his response and his outreach to the black community, but he has said that he has done more for African Americans as a president since Abraham Lincoln, and that prior to the virus and the shutdown of the economy, no president, and he says this, has done more to bring down the black unemployment rate and to create more jobs for the minority community in general, and that he was a big reason for that. So do you think the criticism of him that he doesn't care, or worse, targets African Americans is justified?
Well, no, you've got LBJ, you got Abraham Lincoln, and of course Obama symbolically did much for black folk, but I don't think he did enough substantially. But all three of those presidents could be easily pitted against Brother Trump himself. I've been very hard on Brother Trump. I just think that he's got these gangster sensibilities such that it's not just a matter of the name calling. Look, we calling black people sons of bitches's. You see, that he's talking about my mama. You see what I mean? So how in the world any black folk are going to think?
Well, I think wasn't he referring at the time to NFL players? No, Reverend, wasn't he talking at the time about NFL players who kneeled during the national anthem? I don't think he was making a generic statement about African Americans.
Well, but Colin's my brother, you know what I mean? Colin's my very dear brother. To call his mama that is, in some sense, a principle of transitivity. So I feel a certain hit and a certain hurt in that regard. But that's just the beginning of it. The various attacks on sister. My dear sister from Los Angeles, called attacks on her. I wanting dignified. But the point is this: there's no doubt that there has been, prior to the virus, a reduction of the levels of unemployment. And that is significant. I give him credit. That is significant, but it's completely undercut by tone, temperament, vicious name calling, unbelievable attacks and assaults, the SHITHOLES associated with black people. Those are brothers and sisters of mine too, in those third world countries. You see, that kind of xenophobic, racist language simply cannot in any way allow him to view himself as somehow making grand contributions to the black freedom struggle. And that's just the beginning. You can imagine.
Now, you mentioned Barack Obama. You mentioned Barack Obama, Doctor, and obviously his vice president is the Democratic nominee, all but complete now.
Yeah.
And there's strong pressure on him to pick an African American woman. Do you think that's important? Would you be disappointed if he did not do that?
Well, I'm no great fan of Brother Joseph Biden. I'm going to vote for him because I want to push Trump out. I'm part of an anti-fascist coalition, but I'm no great fan of Biden. And so if he does choose a black sister, of course, it's going to be a high-quality candidate. We shall see. But I'm not really holding my breath one way or the other in that regard. I have a critique of the system as a whole, as you know. And therefore, I'm just, at this point, I just want to make sure that Trump makes his exit.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going. Doctor, thank you very much. Dr. Cornel West, Harvard University professor, best-selling author. We'll have more of it, including Pastor Darrell Scott, who has a read on the significance